Hey Village, welcome to another episode of Womanhood Decoded, where each episode I endeavor to explore the intersections between womanhood, motherhood, and sexuality. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am your host, Tasha Ray, and I have to start out the show by also saying it is still Black History Month. So happy Black History Month to everybody. Additionally, I feel like if I didn't acknowledge the Super Bowl halftime show, I just had to. Because it, to me, celebrated everything black, and everything black was on display, and I was definitely here for it. And whether or not you are a fan of that particular genre of music, I feel that the level of creativity and ingenuity that was on display was second to none, I feel. Moving on, being that it is Black History Month, I wanted to also incorporate a quote from Harriet Tubman. And she said, I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had to do, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other. Heavy, isn't it? Well, I feel like I want to focus this episode on communicating through or during conflict. So I'm going to start out by defining a term or two. So first of all, communication is defined by the imparting or exchanging of information or news, or it is considered to be a means of sending or receiving information such as through various telecommunication devices or machines. Moving on, conflict doesn't always have to be a negative thing. A conflict can be an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to experience something or a topic from a different perspective. I, for one, believe that differences should be celebrated, and finding ways to listen with both ears versus seeking to respond is a thing that is much easier said than done, especially in the thick of it, and especially when you care about the people with whom you are communicating. But I have some tools and strategies for you in this episode. I feel that at our big ages, we should be striving to push through difficulty and push through the challenging topics that we might face in each other's or in everyday life. So, the book that I want to highlight is entitled The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. So basically, the book is about radical acceptance. So rather than feeling like you need to always rebuttal or prove someone wrong or right, or argue with a person, she says that we should basically just accept that we are not in charge of the narratives of others, and we should furthermore allow them to think whatever they want to think, because at the end of the day, someone's thoughts shouldn't be impacting us to the point that we are not able to do what it is that we set out to do ourselves. She also talks about this idea where one becomes paralyzed by thoughts. Now, just taking a moment to let that sink in, or to explore the idea of what it means to be paralyzed by thoughts. I think of a moment where one is anxious. I think of a moment where one is overwhelmed. And through all of that, one becomes immobile or unable to be productive. So, therefore, instead of being able to do whatever you've set out to do in a day, you are effectively chained by your thoughts, which is not a place where any of us want to be. But, as the kids say, life is going to life. So no matter how much you plan, no matter how much you strategize, and no matter how much you try to prevent difficulty or to prevent the situation where conflict could arise, that is just a fact of life. And so what she challenges the reader to do is to, first of all, to begin by taking small, consistent changes. And by doing those small, consistent actions, you can change your mind and you can change your life. And when I first read that, I was just immediately moved by how it's almost like a theme in the books that I am reading about how powerful the mind is and how we have the ability to change and to create more than what we think we do. Oftentimes we look to maybe our jobs or maybe our titles or various other ways in which that we view ourselves, and we think that there's no way out, or that basically once we have received whatever label, whether it is good or bad, that is how we are going to be categorized moving forward. But what she says in the book, again, I am referring to The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And thank you for joining me on Instagram and wherever you might be viewing, whether it is on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. I am grateful for your time today. So she says that by making small changes, we can affect change in our lives. Furthermore, there is this idea that we are in control, or that we are in control of everything. But basically, control is an illusion, the author says, and we need to stop wasting our time trying to micromanage every aspect of our lives. There are times when she says we are fighting against the currents of life when it is to our detriment. Thank you so much for your support again from Instagram. And I just think that sometimes when we are in the thick of it, no matter what that it might be, that we feel like we have to do something. So one of the things she brings out in the book is the power of the pause, or the power of choosing to be intentional about just pausing and actually viewing the situation. Because a lot of times when emotions are heightened and when you are theoretically seeing red, that might not be the best moment for conflict resolution, or that might not be the best moment for any sort of solution, because again, your emotions are running at a very high place. So having the ability to be self-aware enough to be able to pause and reposition yourself will, in a lot of cases, put you in a better place in terms of being able to find a solution, and a better place of where you can actually listen to the other person or parties, and also be more aware of the words that you are actually communicating. Because again, when temperatures are running high, I know that I can be very passionate, as I have said in previous episodes. And so I am tackling these topics not because I have mastered them. I am tackling these topics because I feel like in my journey, it will not only be therapeutic for me to share, but also because I believe you all might be experiencing something similar in your life. And I want to be able to share some of the books and some of the tools and strategies that I am doing my best to apply to my actual life. And again, I want to preface the whole episode by saying, again, communicating through conflict is not at all something that I have mastered, but it is something that I know that I need to work on to be able to evolve, to become a better person and a better mom. And that to me is one of the biggest motivators for my own personal growth and improvement, is so that I can show my daughter a less toxic way to navigate difficulty in her life. And we all know that children watch way more than they listen. And so again, this is a struggle area for me, but in reading the book, The Let Them Theory, I feel that I was empowered in new ways because I got to understand, first of all, some of my triggers, and understanding my triggers has allowed me to look at myself in a different way, especially during conflict. And again, the whole purpose of evolving and becoming better isn't to become perfect at all. It is for me to improve and to show progress in my life as opposed to remaining stagnant. Additionally, we all have heard this saying that says, doing the same thing repetitively, expecting a different outcome, is not only problematic, but it is the very definition of insanity. And I believe that there is quite enough going on in our world where we don't need to add to the chaos that we are seeing. So again, I want to focus on the idea of what it means to push through, and what are some tips or some strategies that we can do to push through. So, number one, pausing. Number two, accepting. And number three, communicating and listening in a way where the focus isn't so much on who is right or who is wrong, because regardless to whatever the topic is, we all have a different lived experience. And regardless to where you have been raised or where you grew up or who you are around, we all have a different perspective, and I feel that those perspectives should not only be heard, but they should be respected. And even if a thought is in conflict with your own thought, you might realize that while you aren't going to completely shift over your thought process to how another person thinks, just allowing yourself the ability to have flexibility, I think you will notice that the environment for inclusivity and the environment for tolerance grows when we learn to truly listen, with, like I said, both ears. Then digging a little deeper to this idea of what does it mean to let them versus being a passive passenger in your life. Because I feel like there has to be either a happy medium between hypervigilance and just going with the flow. There has to be somewhere in the middle. And I don't know if anybody has really gotten a grasp on how to do that, so much as just giving tools on how we can better navigate when we find ourselves in the midst of difficulty. So, one thing I want to bring to you all's attention is this quote. She said in the book, Let Them, the problem isn't you. The problem is the power you unknowingly give to other people, especially in the midst of conflict. So, what Mel Robbins is referring to here is we are actually more in control of our emotions than we realize. And even if someone knows how to specifically push our buttons, she's saying that we are giving them our power when we allow our buttons to be pushed in the midst of a conflict or in the midst of a difficult situation. And again, just like every aspect of life, especially as it pertains to mental health and overall health and wellness, when we learn to exercise the muscles and the tools and the strategies that we learn on our own mental health journeys, we will notice that it's not as difficult as it once was. So if you go to the gym and you attempt to do 100 push-ups or 100 sit-ups, or you attempt to run 10 miles when you've never been able to run even 1 mile or 2 miles successfully, that might not be the best place to start. But if you start somewhere and you are consistent, then in the same way that your body will start to change and your body will start to recover quicker and you'll be able to see the benefits of those changes when you're working on the inner work that is required or that's necessary on a mental health journey. You will notice that it is not such an emotional struggle, or it's not such a difficult thing for you to be able to use the strategies that you read about or that you talk about, because you are practicing using those strategies in your daily life, and you're not just waiting for when things are difficult. You are learning to communicate your boundaries. You are learning to do so in all types of various different relationships. And sometimes when we think about boundaries, a lot of the times we tend to hyper focus on romantic relationships or dynamics, as opposed to just looking at the totality of the various different types of dynamics that we have. And what I would just like to say is that I've noticed that when I have implemented boundaries in my own life, whether it is the time that I go to bed or the time that I do whatever particular activity, just being disciplined in myself enables me to have a different level of accountability to myself and to those in my life when I am not only holding others to a particularly high standard, but when I'm holding myself to that same standard, because I'm just going to be as transparent as I possibly can when I say that even when you know that you should change a particular behavior, or that a particular personality trait isn't something that you want to continue to have as a part of who you are as a person, even if you've reached that consensus in your mind, actually making the change is where the difficulty happens. And I say that because, first of all, you're going to be met with pushback, because people in your life, whether they know it or mean to do it or not, I'm sure all of us have heard when people say, well, you're acting funny, or you're acting different, or this isn't how you once used to act. And all of the above might be true. And in those situations or circumstances, rather than being angered or frustrated, I would encourage you to pause and to acknowledge the fact that, yes, while I might have conducted myself in a way that you are used to seeing me behave, I have been doing the work to do something different. And whenever you are publicly saying that you are going to try to do something different, there is always usually going to be a group of people that are basically waiting by somewhere so that they can basically say, aha, look, you failed. But again, the idea isn't to be perfect. The idea is to push forward, and the idea is to continue to evolve. And so in that effort, understand that when you are trying to change, or when you are trying to take on different characteristics, it's not something that is going to happen overnight. And oftentimes it's maybe something that isn't even going to be readily celebrated by those in your circle. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to push forward through the difficulty. I'm going to share something else. The other day, I was having a conversation, and as I was dispensing well-meaning advice, it hit me that the very advice that I was giving is not advice that I had in recent moments been applying. Again, thank you for taking the time to tune in wherever you might be doing so, whether it is Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or LinkedIn. I am grateful for your time. So, getting back to my conversation, I realized while I was giving this sage advice that I wasn't living up to the advice that I was giving. And I had to pause, and I said, I don't know if I have the authority to even speak on the topic, but I can tell you what I know we all should be doing at our big ages as it pertains to navigating conflict. But I'm going to be honest and let you know that I have not mastered this. I have reached the place where I am self-aware enough to know that I need to shift, and I know that I need to do something different, or multiple things different. But when it comes to the actual application, that's where the difficulty is. And I feel like a lot of the times, just thinking about navigating difficulty myself, I feel like we all get bombarded by the stuff of life. So whether it was navigating difficulties in traffic, or whether it was just navigating a challenge throughout your day, whatever it is, it now becomes a part of the emotional load that you are going to be going through the rest of your day with. So even if you have the idea that you have basically parked your emotions at the door, my experience, my lived experience says that we are not doing as great a job at parking our emotions as we might believe. And we are basically using those in our lives as punching bags, as opposed to being a safe place for both growth, listening, and acceptance. We are doing the very opposite because we have either been stressed out, annoyed, or whatever the case may be. And so instead of acknowledging or taking responsibility for whatever it is that has gotten us out of character, we tend to lash out at those that we care about the most. So as I was having that aha moment with my homegirl on the phone, we both decided that we would try to be accountability partners to each other, to try to hold each other up to a higher standard, because we recognize that the ways in which we have navigated at different other chapters of our lives is no longer feasible if we want to have different outcomes in the current chapter that we find ourselves in. And I smiled to myself because, not because it's funny, but just because I feel like when we are sharing, we have the tendency to point the finger, and we have the tendency to fault find, and we do not choose to really allow a person to truly see your faults. But I am a witness that when you are in a relationship, even if it is the best relationship, that person will theoretically be effectively holding up a mirror and or reflection to you. So if you are not aware that you are raising your voice, and or that you are cutting someone off, or that you are being inconsiderate, or any of the things that you might in yourself believe that you have overcome, the other person who has a very aware perspective on who you are as a person, they will let you know that yes, you are still raising your voice, and you are still doing all of the things that you might have felt like you have either stopped doing or that you have evolved past. So again, when I was reading the book, again, the book that I am referring to is The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And when she was talking about allowing others to just be who they are, because at the end of the day, all of us want to be accepted. All of us want to be loved. And I think that, well, I know for me, for one, I am beyond tired of trying to fit into someone's narrative of what they expect me to be, because it's just exhausting to do so. So while I think it is important for us to advocate for the changes that we might want to see in our partners and or our relationship, and or whatever dynamic it is that we would like to see change in, I think we would do all of us a great service if we realize and just take into account how much or how difficult it is to change, even when we want to change. And then just allowing someone to be who they are and choosing to love them regardless. of the imperfection that you might see. So, a friend of mine made a reel on social media, and she said, infatuation is finding a person and then believing they are perfect. Falling in love or being in love is when you realize that the person isn't perfect and you love them anyway. So thank you, Jen, for that, because I feel like, again, this theme that I am seeing in the material that I am reading and that I am hearing echoed in my mind as it pertains to people that I am speaking to and getting feedback from, I think all of us want to do better. And I think all of us want to show up as our best selves. However, when we are faced with difficulty, it's super easy for us to fall back into our old patterns of behavior. And when we do so, I think that's where self-awareness comes in, and we shouldn't just always, rely upon other people to tell us what our faults are. But anyway, when you are self-aware, when you're able to actually catch yourself real time in a moment of conflict, and you're able to see how you would typically respond, and you're able to pause, and you're able to utilize the strategies that you have learned either through therapy or reading or however you came about the information. I think that's a moment to celebrate, because life is difficult. Anyone that says that it's easy, I don't know. I feel like they haven't been doing a lot of living. And I feel like whenever you feel like you have overcome, or whenever you feel like you have gotten to a place where you have gotten to this summit of change, life will come by and a wave will hit you to basically test the structure or test this quote unquote change that you have shouted from the mountaintops. I have changed and I am a new person. And I just want us to give one another grace. And I want us to also give ourselves the same grace that we would give or extend to a best friend or to a sibling or to whoever it is that you care about. Because I think whether or not we admit it or not, a lot of the times we can be very difficult on ourselves, and we can be our own worst critic. And in doing so, I don't feel like that is something that is going to help us to be our best selves. I think acknowledging when we have not lived up to the standard that we would have liked to have done, or just realizing that there is more work to be done. I feel like I said earlier in this podcast that progress should be the focus as opposed to perfection. And this whole idea of letting people be who they are and being able to show up authentically across the board, whether you are talking to a family member, talking to a significant other, talking to your child, just learning to just be aware. And that taps into the topic of last week when I was talking about what it means to truly be mindful, and how it is the practice of being aware as opposed to just going with the flow, and or as opposed to just accepting things for whatever it is that you have accepted them to be. So, for example, if you accept that it is winter time and it's cold outside and you are not motivated to do all of the things that you are typically motivated to do at different other times of the year, it's fine to acknowledge that. But when you are mindful that there is a shift in your emotional well-being, then you also can be intentional about resetting yourself. So whether that is putting yourself in a different surrounding, whether that is being intentional about taking a walk, or about being more intentional about what it is that you are eating, because all of these things play a role in your overall level of energy, your level of vitality. But most of us, myself included, oftentimes seek to fix things when a problem presents itself, as opposed to being preventative. And in my childhood, my parents taught me that it is far better to prevent any sort of illness than it is to, on the back end, to then try to treat or address the symptoms, because in doing so, the underlying issue will probably still exist if you don't do some sort of lifestyle change or shift. And so what I am trying to convey is this idea that who we are and how we move through life is all interconnected, from our physical embodiment of self and our emotional and psychological embodiment, and or our mental health. And I feel that the more conversations that we have as it pertains to mental health, as it pertains to emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and the idea of being able to actively be able to advocate for ourselves while also being transparent about the fact that I am not perfect, and I recognize that you are not perfect, but together and or collectively we can try to do better, because I feel that none of us want to be an added burden or want to be an added stress to those that we care about. I think all of us want to try to be a positive light and want to try to impart motivation into one another's lives. And if that isn't what our objective is, then maybe we should consider that as a place to start. I feel that sometimes we have this idea in our minds that if we've known someone for X amount of years, or if someone is a family member, that a person must deal with the foolishness, or must deal with our attitude, or they must accept us for the problem that we know that we can be. And I know that, like I said, in various different stages or chapters of my life, I know I have been guilty of saying, well, you know that how I am, but that's a cop-out, because again, if we are trying to evolve, and if we are trying to be mindful, and if we are trying to show up as our best selves, then using the cop out of, you know how I get when I feel a certain way, then I believe that that we're doing a disservice to ourselves when we do that. So I am saying all of these things as a note to myself and as a reminder of things, not just to you, for you all to work on in your lives, but these are things that I am hoping to continue to work on in my life. So, if you are watching, wherever you are watching from, let me know one way that you are being intentional in your life, whether that is holding yourself accountable, whether that is being mindful, or whether that is choosing to apply the idea of radical acceptance. Again, the idea isn't to get to this place of perfection, but it is to have a deeper connection with those that we care about, and to be able to feel like we aren't always having to put on a facade or a face or a persona. And I understand that all of us feel the need to do so at certain times because of various different work environments and various different criteria as it pertains to that. But I feel that when it comes to our daily interactions with people, I feel that we should try to strive to take off the mask and to take off the persona and to allow people to see the imperfections, so that one, they can allow you to feel accepted, and so that you don't feel this unrealistic pressure to live up to whatever perceived idea that you have in your mind of how you should be, this perfect version of yourself. But instead of reaching towards that, just reaching towards a better version of yourself. I think another thing before I end this episode is the idea of understanding that time is such a precious commodity. And a lot of times when we are thinking about time, we think about it either at the end of our life or at the end of a relationship or at the end of a job. And we think about the time that we invested in whatever we were investing our time in. And then there is this feeling of regret, or this feeling of maybe overwhelm, because you feel like your time has been wasted. And nobody wants to feel like their time has been wasted. But I would challenge you to shift the thought process from time wasted to time where you are able to learn, and where you were able to practice skills, and where you were able to apply strategies that another circumstance or another relationship or another job might not have brought that out of you. But because of whatever environment that you were in, you had to evolve in different ways so that you could get to the next phase or stage. And I think that whenever we are talking about time and change and any of those things, there's this concept that it is an easy thing to do, or it's not something that is going to require a lot of work. But anything that is worth having or worth acquiring is going to take a certain level of planning, a certain level of time invested, a certain level of just strategic thinking in order to get yourself from point A to point B. No matter if you're talking about a personal area of your life or a professional area of your life. When you're talking about change and you are looking at time, I feel like accepting that it is going to be challenging is a good place to be, because when you are in a mindset, when you recognize something is going to be difficult, you might be surprised by either the idea that it is not as difficult as you might have thought to push for whatever change that you are trying to do in your life, or you might realize that it is giving you a run for your money and it is taking everything out of you. But the highlight or the silver lining is that I have found in my own life that when I have persevered and when I have pushed through some of the most difficult or some of the most darkest times in my life, on the other side was not always something that was easy or not something that was always a yay moment, but I was able to see the growth in myself, and I was able to see or acknowledge that I am not who I once was or how I once communicated. Those things are things that I have grown past. And so as we are all on various different places on our mental health journeys and on our just journey to become our higher or best selves, I think that we should work towards giving ourselves grace, and also, like I said, giving grace to those that we care about and those in our circle. And also, maybe even bigger challenge is to give grace to people that we don't care about, especially because that again is going to be a even more difficult challenge to overcome, to give grace when it is not necessarily easy or when it is not something that you feel like is deserved. But just thinking about your last week of interactions, can you think of any times when someone gave you grace that you didn't deserve and what that felt like? And if it was something that was positive, don't you want to be the person that's able to give that same feeling of acceptance and that same feeling of grace to someone else? Just something to consider as you move through your day. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to tap in with me for this episode of Womanhood Decoded. Again, I am your host, Tasha Ray, and I will be here same place, same time on Friday for my other podcast, Red Lipstick Conversations, and hopefully you will choose to spend some time with me on this coming Friday. So, again, happy Black History Month, and have a great rest of your day, and I will see you later on this week. Bye-bye.